back to Community and Code. I'm your host, Chris Reynolds, and today's episode is one I've been genuinely looking forward to. My guest today is Juliette Reinders Folmer. She's been in the PHP and open source world for close to 20 years, and you've probably used her work today, possibly multiple times, and had no idea. That's kind of the whole thing. The stuff that she maintains runs silently in CI pipelines all over the world, doing the thankless work that keeps everyone's code from falling apart. And most of the people depending on that work couldn't tell you her name. We talk about what it actually means to give back to open source, not in the abstract, but with real practices, and what happens when the people who built the internet start retiring. Juliette has some genuinely spicy opinions about AI that are some of the more coherent and technically grounded takes I've heard on this show, and definitely not the AI is going to change everything in the best way possible perspective. We talk about her path into tech, her philosophy on LinkedIn, and the story of how she accidentally became the steward of one of the most widely used PHP tools on the planet. This is Community and Code. Let's go. Welcome to Community Code. Today on the show, I've got Juliette Reinders Folmer, who is, I see her flinch at my pronunciation. I'm sorry. I'll let her pronounce it correctly. If you have been in the open source PHP world for any amount of time, you've probably seen JRF kind of everywhere. I feel like I see your handle like literally everywhere. But for anyone who might not know you, Juliette, who are you and what do you do?
Can I just respond to what you just said first?
Sure, yes.
A lot of the time I feel completely invisible. And that because a lot of what I work on are like the tooling people use, which just silently run in your CI,
Yeah.
and people don't even notice. So I feel very invisible a lot of the time. So it's interesting to see that in your perception, that's very different.
Yeah.
So yeah, what I work on largely are the tooling in the background, things like PHP CodeSniffer, PHP Parallel Lint, PHP CSUtils, but also test tooling like PHPUnit Polyfills, PHPCompatibility. There's a whole range of those tools you use when you are coding to make sure that your code complies with certain standards, can run on certain PHP versions, can be tested on certain PHP versions, etc. So those kind of tooling is what I mostly work on.
And you've been really, really deep in PHP for a really long time, but I wanna put a pin in that and come back to it and start off by hearing about. I'd love for you to share how you got interested in technology, in computers, in software development. Like what is the story that got you involved in this stuff in the first place?
We're going back, way back. I did actually specialize in IT when I did my business degree. But to be honest, I don't think anything I learned in that specialization was actually useful. Yeah. So I was interested in technology anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point I came across this non-profit organization, and it would have been really, really, really hard to find them. And we're talking 1999, 2000. So when I first met the people behind this non-profit, I was like, why don't you have a website?
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, yeah, that's one of those things we still have on our to-do lists.
Mm-hmm.
And I then uttered the unfortunate phrase, maybe I can help.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'd been playing around a little bit with HTML, just experimenting, seeing what it was. I mean, I used the internet a lot in my work already, but that was it. But at that time, using the internet a lot for your work was extraordinary already. I was like way ahead of the curve at that time. So based on that, I felt I could at least give them some advice and, help them a little bit. And I ended up building their website and then maintaining it for a number of years. And that started off with HTML with SSI, server-side includes, something nobody nowadays has heard of anymore. then changed that to JavaScript include, and then later added CSS. And then at some point, we switched towards a proper CMS. But yeah, this was how I got started. And then starting actually developing and contributing to open source was like I was using things which were open source. And to me, and this is really old school maybe, but I still feel that way. If you use something which people make available for free, you give back. Whether that is by adding a translation, or by funding the project, or by adding a new feature, I don't care. Give back. If you use something, you give back. That is the premise of open source. That's how it was built. That was the idea of making it open source so everyone could contribute and we could all collaborate together. And the fact that that isn't being done anymore, largely because the vast majority of users have no clue what open source is, let alone that they're using it, is something which I see as extremely problematic. But let's talk about that later. But yeah, so one of the things I started doing was contributing back, partially by asking questions, but then also documenting the answers, whether it was in a JavaScript form or translating a Firefox extension. It was those little things, and then that sort of spiraled and yeah, went out of control a bit.
Out of control. Well, and maybe we'll talk about how in or out of control it is currently with your contributions. But yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense because for me as well, like when I discovered WordPress, the thing that kept me like interested in using it was the fact that there was all of this documentation. There was like, it was really easy to find answers to questions. There was back then the IRC channel that you could drop into and ask questions. And there is this community around it that was really passionate and active. And yeah, when I felt like I knew enough stuff or knew something, then I got involved in like the documentation team. I started speaking. I started like, writing stuff and eventually creating my own like plugins and things. And that's always been a thing that like, I mean, that's just like, I don't even think about it really. Like it's like, if I'm making a thing, I'm probably making it open source, right? So do you feel like with the growth of the adoption of open source technologies by, because it's not just individuals that are using it anymore. I mean, not that it like ever was just individuals, right? But like, WordPress is 43% of the internet or whatever, right? Like, and a lot of that is driven by a larger market sort of interest in using open source as its tool. As opposed to proprietary systems that are closed source, like Adobe Experience Manager, that sort of thing. Like, do you see this rise of interest by people with a lot more money than you or me, and organizations with a lot more money than you or me, contributing to the dip in giving back in this sort of like egalitarian, like open source, community?
There is a term for it, and that term is very apt. It's called exploitative capitalism. And it's happening all over. And it's definitely a part of why open source doesn't have enough contributors, let alone funding contribution. I mean, on an average Android phone, I think 70, if not 90% of the software on it, it's open source, except the end user doesn't know it. They are not being told that what they've bought is actually exploited on the shoulders of people who have done this work for free and are not getting any money from the fact that they're buying that phone. If you buy a car, it has curl inside, and curl is just one example, but there's so much more software in that navigation system and in that car system, do you think those car manufacturers give 1 penny back to open source?
Right.
Yes, there is a term for it. It's called exploitative capitalism. And yes, it's absolutely a large reason why open source is struggling. Because the end users don't even know they're using open source. They often don't even know what open source is.
Right.
But they are using it every day. And they kind of like, oh, but if that's the case, then the car manufacturer will, put money towards the people who build the software they're using and selling with their cars. They have that expectation, and it's just not happening. And to me, this is problematic, and not just in the day-to-day problematic. I'm looking at a longer term future. I'm looking at, in 10, 15 years time, a lot of the original open source maintainers reach pension age.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking a significant number of people reaching pension age, or let's be realistic, dying in the next 15 to 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't start training the next generation of maintainers now, open source is going to have a huge problem, because all those projects are going to go unmaintained, or, semi-maintained by someone who thinks they know what they're doing but doesn't really. And then we have the security issues which get reported. And you hear what I'm saying?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I think this is very, like, I have a screwball to throw in a second, but like, even like PHP lost its lead developer a couple years ago, and that was a big deal too. So like, this is like already starting to happen. But
PHP doesn't have a lead developer.
well,
No, there never was.
okay.
It's a group effort of a group of volunteer maintainers, some of them which are now partially or completely funded by the PHP Foundation, which is completely separate from the PHP project, by the way. But there is no hierarchy there. There is a hierarchy of respect for people who've contributed, but there is no formal hierarchy. There is no one voice has more value than another. I
Well,
just want to make sure that this is clear for people.
yeah, no, I mean, that's more than I knew.
And
But
that's also how it is in most open source projects. At some point, yes, the people who have commit rights have a bigger say.
Mm-hmm.
But and yeah, if you're like me, the only one with commit rights in some projects, that's problematic. And I don't want to be the only one. I really don't want to be.
Yeah.
But a lot of projects, including the PHP project, have a lot more committers. And then that hierarchy doesn't necessarily exist.
This conversation about the maintainers and lead developers of open source projects sort of aging out of the system, and the need for new developers to learn and be sort of trained up to be able to take on, to carry the torch, it dovetails with another thing that I've been thinking about that I'd love to hear if you've thought about, or what your thoughts are on it, which is the rise of AI. Because the theory is, like, the thing that I hear immediately in my head of like the answer that I would hear from, like, I don't know, status quo, is like, oh, well, that's not going to matter in 10 to 15 years because AI is going to write all that code anyway.
Bullshit.
So and what I observe in various places within the tech industry is companies, and maybe not so much now. I think there was a really big move towards this last year, and maybe people are realizing that maybe this isn't quite ready yet. But there's this idea that we don't necessarily need to hire as many developers because we can have AI do the work of the junior developers. And the problem that I've been talking about with various people, and the thing that I've been thinking about, is you can't have junior developers and have all your senior developers be reviewing the code of the AI if you don't hire the junior developers to write the actual code, because they're never going to become senior if they never if they were never hired as a junior.
Yeah, if you never have juniors, you're never going to get seniors.
Right.
But there's, I mean, I really rather we don't have a conversation about AI because that will fill the rest of the time we have. But let me make some short statements about AI. First, I'll be employed for life. I will have work for the rest of my life because the bugs AI creates are far more subtle than the bugs most humans create, which means that only real experts will be able to find them and fix them. And it costs a lot more time.
Yep.
So I'll be employed for life. Please do keep it on vibe coding. I love you. But having said that, AI, the way it's currently trained, it has trained itself largely on open source code without permission.
Yep.
What this literally means is if you use AI, you are legitimizing the theft of copyrighted code. For me, that is an ethical thing. We are legitimizing theft if we approve of AI. Aside from that, the AI does not take the license into account at all. Mm-hmm. So in PHP CodeSniffer, I have a very explicit section in the contributing guide saying, do not use AI. We can't, unless you can guarantee that AI has not been trained on software which has a license which is incompatible with the BSD license which CodeSniffer uses, I cannot accept the code. Because relicensing a 20-year-old project means getting permission of hundreds and hundreds of contributors, all of them which need to give permission for the relicensing. And so if the AI was trained on code which included GPL code, GPL being a viral license, if that code would end up in CodeSniffer, it would literally force CodeSniffer to have to relicense, and I can't do that. So this is a problem. The second part of it is, and seriously, I've thought a lot about AI, and I absolutely detest it. The second part of it is, if someone sends me a PR created with AI, it's very rare someone who actually knows what they're doing is doing that. Mm-hmm. So most of the time, it's someone who is basically saying, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, so I'm using AI to sort of frame what I want, and then you sort it out. I review that PR as if it's someone who actually knows what they're doing. So I give them feedback as if they're an equal. They will not understand a word of my feedback. So they go back to the AI, feed my feedback into the AI, ask the AI to give me an answer. Do you think that's a useful way of spending my time?
I feel like I've watched meme videos that are like this precise like interaction where you have like the developer at the one computer and you tell the developer do this thing, and he goes to ChatGPT and ChatGPT does the thing and then submits the PR, and then somebody else like looks at the PR and like, but the other person also doesn't know how to write software, so they put the PR into the AI, and then you have like just these two AIs having a conversation with the humans as the medium, like sending the messages through, like,
which I think is the wrong way around.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a way. I mean, for me to coach an AI generated PR to completion takes about 10 times as much time as when a human would create that PR.
Yeah.
In open source, what's the most precious commodity?
Yeah, time.
Maintainer time.
Yeah.
Specifically, maintainer time. What's being wasted with AI contributions? Maintainer time.
Yeah.
If you then take that and extrapolate this, that with AI, people who are, AI prompters, not software developers, but AI prompters, can generate far more PRs than a normal human would do. And every single PR needs maintainer time, even if it is just to say AI slop, reject, close. It
Yeah.
still takes time. It still takes mental energy. And it drains mental energy from maintainers. If you then say, okay, I'm going to ignore anything that even remotely looks like AI slop, or I'm not even going to open the repo to PRs. Okay, not very open sourcey, but say you do that. What about security reports? Security reports, again, can be generated with far more frequently and with in far larger amounts than ever before using AI. The validity of those is barely any. Yeah, most of those aren't valid at all. So, but a security report cannot be ignored. You must, as a maintainer, look at those. That means maintainer. What we're heading for is maintainer gridlock, where maintainers, instead of being able to maintain, just have to spend all their time closing AI slop. That is the death of open source. And maybe that's actually what all those AI companies would like, because they are all funded by closed source companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry
Let's
for ranting, but yeah.
No, it's a really good rant. I end up talking about AI a fair amount on this show, and I'm always interested to hear different voices, and many of the people that have been on. I'd probably say the majority of people that I've had as guests are very AI yay. So I'm very happy to have an AI nay, because I feel like I don't know. I definitely see the ethical concerns. I've seen the ethical concerns from the beginning. Like, you look at Dolly and Dolly E as in the image generation, not Dolly as in the Salvador.
Yeah.
Um, like it's easy to make things that look like other things, and it's easy to produce stuff that looks like other stuff. And there's you know, the argument within the folks that use AI for software development is, well, I was going to probably be doing a Google search on Stack Exchange or whatever anyway, and copying code, and half of open source is copied from somewhere else anyway. What's the difference? But there is a really big difference, and you bring up all the really good points. Licensing is one of them. I mean, licensing and the theft of creative works is essentially, like, that is the model, that is the data set, that is the foundation on which all of these large language models are built, whether they're dealing with images or text or software or whatever.
Yeah, and if you let yourself be inspired by other people's code or even copy parts of that code, if you are a human and you are a decent person, you would add a co-author tag
Hmm.
at the bottom of your commit message and give them credit. And that way you credit the original author, even though you made adjustments and adapted it for the code you want to use it in. But you credit them, you comply with copyright requirements, you comply with the legal requirements. One of the first encounters I had with AI was actually a friend of mine who DM'd me and said, I was using, I was experimenting with AI. We're talking 2-3 years ago,
Hmm.
the very early days of AI. I was experimenting with AI and a WordPress plugin or something, and they started a doc block, and they started with, I think, an alter tag, and the AI filled my name in. And they screenshotted that and shared that with me, which made both of us laugh enormously. But it goes to show that it is theft
Hmm. Right.
without giving credit
Uh,
and without complying with license requirements. Just basically, yeah.
I mean, I have a similar anecdote, and then we can shift off of AI. But I have a similar anecdote. There's an AI platform that does music called Suno, and so a lot of I watched a lot of stupid Instagram reels where somebody like made AI do a country song that was really off the wall, like really wacky and stupid. So I was like, okay, how do they do that? And I figured it out. There's this thing called Suno, um, and I was playing with it, and I as an experiment took the lyrics of "Never Gonna Give You Up" by
Yes.
by Rick Astley, and I put it into Suno, um, so that and just to see what it would do. And you can with Suno you can give it different genres of music. You can do it whatever. And it gave back one of the things that it gave back to me had the precise melody of the actual song. And Suno says that they don't use real music as their source, as their data set. But
Yeah.
there is it is not. I mean it's the idea that you can put 1,000 monkeys in a room and eventually they'll write Hamlet. Like it's that level of absurdity
Yeah.
to consider that there's no way that it just accidentally stumbled upon Rick Astley's vocal melody, without having that in the data set somewhere. You can have a lot of rules about like don't do that, but like it has to be there somewhere.
Correct.
Yeah. So
Um,
a lot of this conversation has been from the perspective of an open source maintainer.
yeah.
Let's switch to the things that you maintain. One of those things is PHPCS. And I'd like you to talk about PHPCS, like what the project is, but also how you came to be the sort of leader of this project, because that's also its own sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, to first answer your first question, what is PHPCS? Well, PHPCS actually is PHP CodeSniffer, and combines two tools: code sniffing as well as code fixing, the code beautifier and fixer. So PHPCS and PHPCBF as command line tools. Um, what it is basically a framework for analyzing code, analyzing PHP code primarily. Originally, well, at some point it also allowed for analyzing CSS and JavaScript code, but that's now been removed because, let's be fair, there are better tools for that.
Yeah.
And more, dedicated tools for
Yeah.
those languages. Yeah. And when this was introduced in PHPCS, those tools didn't exist yet. Now they do. So now it's time for PHPCS to drop that support for those things. So yes, we're analyzing PHP code. That's not done by running the code. No, the code is literally read as if a human would be reading it, except it's a machine reading it. And a human who writes the sniffs, the checks we're doing, executing on the code, tells the machine to say, okay, if there is a space before it, then we need to remove it, or if there is no space, we need to add it, or and that sounds very code styly, and yes, it is. That's the original premise on which CodeSniffer was built, but because it's a framework, it allows for more, and it allows for things which aren't auto-fixable, which is why something like PHP compatibility could be built on it. And PHP compatibility is an external standard for PHP CodeSniffer, so it builds on top of the framework of CodeSniffer. It uses CodeSniffer to be run. But what it does is you can tell it, okay, I want my code to be compatible with PHP 7.4 until current. Tell me everything you can find that is incompatible with that. And it's not 100%. I mean, there are changes in PHP which we cannot detect with this kind of static analysis, no matter what we do. But there are a lot of changes in PHP which we can detect. Say 70% of the compatibility things we can detect by static analysis. And we will flag those. And that's PHP compatibility, an external standard on top of CodeSniffer. So we can't fix those most of the time, because I cannot decide for you. Like I think PHP 8.4, it made implicitly nullable parameters in function signature had to be made explicitly nullable. So if you had class name, variable name is null, that would now be flagged because the class name type did not have the nullable operator in front of it. It did not allow for that null default type. There are different considerations on how to fix that. Of course, you could add the nullable operator, but nullable operator was only introduced in PHP 7.1. If your code needs to be compatible with, 7.0 or 5.6, you can't add the nullable operator. Maybe the better solution would be to remove the null type. Or maybe what's allowed since PHP 8.2, if you have a minimum of 8.2, you could even have a new, and then the actual object and create the object as the default value. So there are different solutions, and we cannot decide which solution is best. For code style things, PHP CodeSniffer and also a lot of the external standards around CodeSniffer, because there are quite a few, most of those will have auto fixes, and you can just run CBF, the code beautifier, and it will fix your code. There are strategies of how to do that to still keep it reviewable. I mean, the patch we did for WordPress at some point was over 100,000 lines of code changed. And maybe not the best way to do it. But it makes life easier. It can also find bugs. It can find code inefficiencies. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot it can do within the framework of static analysis. The one thing it cannot do, and in those situations I recommend write a PHP stand rule, is analysis cross-file. So it basically only has the context of one file, right? Which is a limitation. But hey, within that it can do shitloads. So yeah. Now, how did I get into it? Well, most likely because at some point I wanted a custom rule, and I kind of wrote a rule. God knows, that's like 13 years ago for a company I sometimes work for. And then at some point I found a bug in the WordPress coding standards and submitted a fix because open source. So instead of reporting it, I just submitted a fix. And I'd known about PHP compatibility for a while already, and I'd been using it, and I wanted to contribute to it. So started contributing there. And then when I was started contributing to WordPress coding standards and to PHP compatibility, I found bugs in PHP CodeSniffer itself. So then I started contributing there. And then I was very, very, very shocked to discover that within 6 weeks, 2 months of contributing. And normally when I start contributing to a project, I don't know, I will start with, 1 or 2 small PRs, wait to see what the response is, whether it's, whether you can actually talk and have a conversation with the maintainer to actually get it merged, or whether the maintainer just ignores it and leaves it to rot. So, I mean, I'm not going to waste my time on projects which aren't actively maintained. In this case, they were being picked up, they were being merged. So then you get more PRs from me. And within 8 weeks time, I was already the second most prolific contributor to CodeSniffer. And that shocked me no end. The fact that a tool which is, I mean, I've done some calculations. Basically, it's used by about 10 million people a day.
Number is astronomically ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's just a guess.
Yeah,
10 million people a day. And the amount of contributors is small, and that even with, I think it was 10, 20 PRs, I was already the second most prolific contributor is still incredibly shocking to me. And it's not gotten much better. There's still very few outside contributors, and that is problematic. I want to grow that contributor pool. Yes, I'm an extremely critical reviewer, but that I try to explain everything. so people learn and grow, and the next time I don't need to explain it anymore, and they do it right.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, I'm not. I have a feeling I'm not succeeding in growing that contributing pool well enough. So yeah, originally I started contributing. This is like nearly 10 years ago. And then that's, I stayed like the next to the maintainer, the second most prolific contributor. At some point, I was doing a lot of the daily contributions. With the maintainer, the original maintainer, having less and less time and less interest in maintaining it because, life happens, different work interests, different life interests, and that's perfectly fair. So in late 2023, they messaged me and basically said, I'm abandoning it. And I was like, yeah, but something that's used by this many people on a daily basis, I don't think abandoning it is a good idea. But there wasn't anyone else really who could take over. And I had other plans. But yeah, as there wasn't anyone else.
And at that point, it shifted, and it's now PHP CodeSniffer. It now has its own organization
Yeah.
on GitHub. It's got its own suite of tools that are under that organization.
Oh,
And
those already existed.
right, but
Yeah.
now they're under a
The same organization. Yeah.
yeah, and it's
Basically, the project was originally in the Swiss Labs organization, which is a company,
yeah,
which is the company which originally created it. And the person who originally maintained it, Greg Sherwood, worked for that company. Um, Obviously, that also made it difficult to give anyone else commit rights because they would need to be invited into that company
right,
organization. But yeah, there were some things where Greg and I didn't always agree on how things should go, or extra tooling which I thought was needed, and he wasn't so sure that was needed. So I created that, and I put all of that in a separate organization already when I started creating that like 6 years ago. And when I took over CodeSniffer, the repo didn't get moved, didn't get transferred. I had to fork it, but it is a blessed fork. So Greg has said, yes, this is the official, successor.
hmm
But forking it does have its drawbacks in how people find the project.
right.
A lot of people still sometimes comment on issues in the old repo, or even open new issues in the old repo. And it's like, yeah, but did you read that bit that said this is abandoned and moved elsewhere?
It didn't get archived. It's just still
No, but that's partially at my request,
okay.
and it might now be time to change that.
Yeah,
Now 4.0 has been released.
yeah.
The reason not to archive it is that once it's archived, you can't comment
Right.
anymore.
Yeah.
And if there were still quite a few issues which were valid,
Yeah.
or even things which were supposed to be addressed in 4.0, but 4.0 was started in 2020. And then, 5 years went past, and it still wasn't released. So yeah, it was helpful to be able to inform people that certain things were fixed and in which release they were fixed, or that 4.0 was released at some point, and that those things which had been long-standing issues had been addressed.
You've since taking over really and assuming ownership of many of these things, but also just because of your active contributions across various different projects. I know that you've been talking about the value of funding open source, about sponsoring development. what are the sorts of things that you see as being sort of most important that should be talked about more that aren't being talked about enough that you bring to these sort of like conference presentations and things that you've been going to?
We need to normalize funding open source. I mean, I try to lead by example. So I'm self-employed. I have my own business. I earn money, and I earn money by using open source tooling. So every year at the end of the year, because I'm open to, I'm self-employed, my income widely varies year across year. So I don't know what my income is going to be. So every year in the week between Christmas and New Year, I spent that week funding open source, because by that time I know what my turnover was. And I can say, okay, I'm going to take a percentage of that turnover and give that money to the various open source projects which help me do my job. And I cast a very, very wide net when I do that. I also look at all those tiny tools I use in continuous integration, in CI, in the automated checks, which most people forget, because if those tools stay silent, you don't notice that they're running. But I also use, Irfan View, a Windows graphic imaging program, or I use Joplin. And I fund those projects too. I use Mastodon for communication with a number of people. I fund those projects too. So I cast a very wide net, and I try to give all the projects which were valuable to me, which I didn't actively contribute to with code, I try to give them some money. And I think things like the open source pledge, where companies pledge to spend a certain amount of money for every employee on open source, are good initiatives, and they should be followed. Every company using open source should do this. And we should also talk, when we talk with customers about, we're going to build your website based on WordPress, or we're going to build your website based on Drupal, or we should also have a line item in the proposal and in the invoice, 5% for open source, to fund the project on which you've built the project.
Yeah.
We need to normalize this.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and it's been frustrating for me, specifically, within my own organization, trying to sort of like rally that flag, of and it's not like it's not known, like it's not like we don't know and aren't aware that a lot of the technology that builds the thing that we built an entire platform on top of is built on top of open source, and that we should be giving back. It's just, it never gets prioritized the right time, or like, realistically, like there's one person who's the champion, and then that person moves on to another company, and then nobody carries that flag, and then and then everything just sort of dwindles, and it's frustrating that it's such a hard conversation to have.
I keep repeating the term exploitative capitalism.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know it's hard. I mean, I have a pretty good view of all the things I use. But I also know that a lot of companies don't have that. So there are tools which can help with that. There's Tidelift, which can help distribute based on the log files in your project. There's ThanksDev, which does a similar service. Even GitHub Sponsors allows to say, okay, check my projects, check which projects are out of all the projects I use can use funding, and will be able to give you some clue of where your money should go. I'm not saying those projects are perfect, because they will still miss a lot. They will miss the fact that I use Joplin on my desktop, for instance.
Yeah.
Just as an example. But they can definitely help at least get started. And getting started, once you start giving to open source, it becomes something which you can have a conversation about. Okay, but are we funding that project? Or hang on, we're actually basically maintaining that project. So maybe we shouldn't fund that project, but because we're maintaining it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And then the conversation shifts to where the money should go instead of whether money should go there.
Well, thank you so much, Juliette. Once again, I'm so happy to have you on. For anyone on the internet who might be interested in the stuff that you're working on or finding you wherever you might exist on the internet, where can people find you?
Primarily, if you are interested in what I do, go to GitHub, github.com, and then /jrfnl. That's me. If you want to follow me on social media, you can. I'm on Mastodon, and that's obviously one of those addresses which people need to spell out. So maybe you can post them in the show notes underneath it, and I will send you a link.
Yep.
I'm also on X still. I don't post much on X at all anymore because everyone I follow has moved to Mastodon, but there are still quite a lot of people following me on X, which is why I still post notices about releases and such on X. I'm on LinkedIn. Again, welcome to follow me. Do not send me a link request unless I know you.
That shouldn't be an uncomfortable thing to ask. That is the thing that is the rule that I have abided by for most of the time that I've used LinkedIn. Like if I have not met you or do not know in what context you, because I'll this is a total tangent, but when I started coming up with that rule, it was when I was doing Pluralsight videos, and what would happen is people would find my Pluralsight courses, and then they would want to connect with me on LinkedIn. And at the very beginning, I was naive, and I was like, "Oh, build your network, whatever. More people is better," because maybe I'll get connected to somebody, and that'll lead to something, and who knows what. But what it actually meant was now that I have this connection with this person, they can ask me support questions about the thing that they're building or the class that they've taken that I did, which was not really the intent. So
what I also found is especially headhunters who try to then exploit your network.
Yeah.
And I see myself as the gatekeeper for my network. I want to protect the people in my network from being harassed. So only people I've met get access to that.
Yeah.
And yes, that didn't. I've done a Pluralsight course as well, so that's interesting. Yeah.
Well, again, thank you, Juliette, for coming on. And for everyone else on the internet who may be finding or watching this, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And we'll see you on the internet.